Thank you all for coming. It's an honor to facilitate this webinar, this panel here. My name is Eli Harris. I'm one of the co-founders of R0, a biosafety technology company, and we're here today to talk about healthy buildings. Before we jump in, just one bit of housekeeping. Through the South by Southwest EDU Go app, you can click the Engage button on the session page, and you can drop in questions, and we're going to leave ample time for Q&A at the end. So just at a high level, talking about why we're here, there's a growing body of science and evidence around healthy buildings and the impacts that our buildings, infrastructure, and facilities actually have on the performance of its occupants. What that means for schools is we can start making decisions about how we design schools, what facilities we include, and how that can actually shape the education of our children. So that's really what we're here to talk about today is how can facilities play a role in the core mission of the district, which is facilitating student performance. So before we dive in, I just want to quickly highlight a couple figures just for us to keep back of mind as we have this discussion. Some of these figures are pretty astonishing as we've started uncovering more and more data the past few years. The EPA put out a study just last year that humans now spend more than 90% of their lives indoors. Which is pretty remarkable. We are now an indoor species, and I think it's actually, there's even some folks out there saying that the facilities managers in our spaces actually have a higher impact on human health than our doctors do, because of the time that we spend indoors breathing in these spaces and living in these spaces. Another figure I want to call out is just the number of persons every single day that actually frequent our K through 12 public education facilities. Every single day, more than 55 million students and 7 million staff enter the physical footprint of our public education system, which really is an astonishing number of lives that we're impacting on a daily basis. Lastly, I want to show a report that was done by UNICEF this year that actually shows that the projected losses in lifetime earning of our students due to school closures is $17 trillion. So all of the school closures that happened during the pandemic does not just impact the day-to-day experience of these students, it actually changes the opportunities that they're going to receive in life and the trajectories that they're on. So I think it's actually a really beautiful thing that COVID, the silver lining is that it created more robust conversation around what we can do in facilities to actually take care of its occupants and enable better outcomes, not just on a day-to-day basis, but in the lives of these players. So that's my quick little introductory spiel. And now who you guys are really here today to hear from, I want to introduce our two panelists. With me here, I have Dr. Michael Hinojosa. Dr. Hinojosa is currently the superintendent of Dallas Independent School District. Dr. Hinojosa has served 6 public education systems during his more than 22 years as a superintendent, including 2 of the 25 largest school systems in America, Dallas ISD in Texas and the Cobb County School District in suburban Atlanta, Georgia. His career in public education, from teacher and coach to superintendent, spans more than 3 decades. Thank you, Dr. Hinojosa. Second, we have here Jeff Wagner, who is the former Chief Facilities Officer at Clark County School District. Jeff is an architect by training, and he has focused much of his career on how the built environment intersects with education outcomes. For the last 6 years, Jeff served as the Chief of Facilities for Nevada's Clark County School District, the 5th largest district in the country, serving more than 320,000 students and 70% of all students in Nevada. Jeff has managed the district's $7.7 billion capital improvement plan to construct, replace, and modernize more than 100 schools, centered around a core mission to improve student performance and achievement. It's an honor for me to be here with you guys. The number of lives you've impacted in the past decades has really been meaningful, so thank you. Dr. Hinojosa, I'd like to start with you as we open up our discussion. I want to ask, just as the superintendent of one of the largest school districts in the country, what is top of mind for you right now?
Well, right now, currently, making sure that our students accelerate their learning. Because you mentioned it, the amount of loss that they've had has been significant. And so we're trying everything to make sure we get the students motivated. We never apologize for our demographics. We're 95% ethnic minority. We're 72% Latino, 21% African American, 47% English learners. And our students, their parents have had to, ones that had to work. And so we also learned that only 5% of our students really did well in virtual instruction. So as you're talking about the facilities, the students need to be in the facilities to have an equal life's chance, especially in urban systems. I've been a suburban superintendent 3 times. And actually, that was an old bio. Man, I've been a superintendent for 27 years, and I've been an educator for 40 years. And stuff that I learned that I never thought I would know anything about. One was I was superintendent right outside of Austin in Hayes County. And I had to learn this word, stachybotrys. Anybody know what stachybotrys is? Well, stachybotrys is black mold. We had a school that the kids were all sick, and people were, the parents were mad, and the teachers were going home, and the administration kept telling that there was nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with the building. They kept testing it. Well, finally, we removed one of the barriers, one of the panels, and we found that 73% of the walls had this black mold in them. And that's why these kids were sick and they were suffering academically. And so you fast forward to those kinds of things that I've learned. And Dallas, we have a $3.4 billion bond program because we're modernizing the entire district. But because I truly believe that the academic improvement of the school system is tied to the general health of the district, but in particular of the buildings. If you're going to spend this kind of time in your building, you got to do that. And now we have a virtual school and we have a hybrid school. But we know that 95% of our kids are going to have to be in the buildings, and we're doing everything from reinventing summer school. We're calling it Summer Breeze. We have our core instructional program that has to be dynamic at our 60 most struggling schools. And we're having school from 3 to 6 and trying to trick the kids through enrichment into staying at school. And then, of course, we have 46 campuses that have gone year-round in the building, in the school. And so that's why this topic is very important to any kind of success we might have in the future.
Yes, you talk about the distance learning. It is near impossible to achieve equitable outcomes. And can you tell us about that Operation Connectivity program that you ran, and how did you try to maintain some form of equity for the students during that challenging time?
One of the best things that we did before the pandemic is we had a long-range facilities master plan. But what drove the master plan was our long-range technology plan. And so we already had a plan to have devices for all of our students. And that was coming together. And then 2 years ago, right before spring break, almost 2 years to the day, we found out about this virus spreading so fast. And then we were going to have Kindles for our pre-K2 kids. We were going to have Chromebooks for our middle school kids. And we made the decision. We didn't know what we didn't know. We made the decision to start deploying all of our devices, which was great. We were one of the few districts that had all the devices. But then we learned that the Kindle wasn't good enough for our pre-K2 kids. We had to go to Apple tablet. And then for our high school students that are in P-Tech, a Chromebook wasn't good enough, so we had to have a PC for those students. But then we stumbled into 36,000 households that did not have connectivity. And it's the same households in southern Dallas where you don't have grocery stores, you don't have coffee shops, you don't have restaurants. And so we launched Operation Connectivity. And what that meant is, and I had no authority to do anything. Now, we did put $25 million in our bond program because we knew we were going to need this issue. But I learned a long time ago from studying the Harvard Business Review, John Cotter, he's a teacher of transformation, and he talks about why transformations fail. He says there's 2 main reasons. There's not a sense of urgency, and then there's not a guiding coalition coming together to solve the problem. Well, the urgency was there. The pandemic was there. We even said, we don't know when we're coming back. We're going home, take these devices with you. But then we developed a guiding coalition to solve the problem. It was myself just making a lot of noise. We got every district in the county to work with us. We got the city, we got the county government, we got AT&T, we got Spectrum. And so we had multiple phases. Our first phase was a short-term phase, and all we could do was give hotspots for these kids to have access to the internet. And later we got lucky because of the election in Georgia. They got 2 senators in. And then the feds gave us some money, so now our money became fungible. But also the families are still afraid that if you sign up for broadband for $5.99, is it going to go up to $39.99 when this 6-month period expires? So we've had to work with AT&T and Spectrum, and so it's been quite the journey. But also we had to set up our own infrastructure in the community. And we're building cell towers at our most urban high schools so that the kids can have access 24/7. We describe this issue as a social justice issue, as a utility issue, because if you did not have broadband, you're not going to learn. Number 2, nobody went to a doctor for a year, so you have no medicine. And then number 3, if you're applying for a job and you don't have it in an electronic form, how are you going to turn in an application? So we just made a lot of noise, and the governor and I don't always get along. We fought over the mask, but he appointed me to a statewide commission for Operation Connectivity, not only in the state of Texas as well. So that's one of the other Hinojosa-isms that I talk about is politics makes for strange bedfellows. When you're getting a crisis, sometimes when people don't agree with each other, all of a sudden have a reason to be together. And like you talk about the silver linings in this pandemic, this was one of them that was really a rallying cry for our community.
That's fantastic. So we learned how important it is to keep kids in these schools. You've also had some really interesting initiatives and frameworks of different innovative models of school where the kids present get to have different educational experiences in the different outcomes that's led to, like P-TECH, the Career Institutes. Can you share a little bit more about how you're using some of these facilities and how important it is for the students to be there?
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to tell you that in 2009, when I was superintendent of Dallas, only 7% of our students got any kind of post-secondary credential 6 years after graduating from high school. But this year, in a pandemic, we had 10% of our students, 900 students, earn an associate's degree before they got their high school diploma. And then we're projecting that every year forward, 1,100 students are going to be walking across the stage in Dallas with our demographics with an associate's degree. And here's the most powerful thing of them. 30%, a third of our kids failed the 8th grade state exam. They shouldn't have even been in high school, except we had this opportunity to promote them with the principal, the teacher, and the parent. And now these kids are getting an associate's degree. And we're in partnership with Dallas College, and they get it for free. And now we have this blockchain technology where all their credentials are on their iPhone. And it's called a thing called Greenlight. And so we've beta tested that. Now we're going to expand that. And so what we had to create was an opportunity for these students to have success. We talk about kids a lot in life. If you're in the top quarter, if you're in advanced placement or international baccalaureate, you're going to college in spite of us. All of us here did well. But we have so many kids that don't do well, so we created a second quarter with P-TECH, and P-TECH is Pathways in Technology. It's a 3-legged stool with us, community college, and business and industry. And we have 90 industry partners who, low risk, high reward, they come in and train our kids on their equipment, and freshman year, they do site visits. A lot of our kids have never been in an elevator. That's what you take for granted. Then they go do mentorship and then internships, and then if they want them, they hire them. American Airlines just hired 11 kids from Adamson High School, mostly girls and mostly Latinas, and they're making $58,000 a year and free flights with America and a 401k. And so we've had to create that. But the only complaint we got about P-TECH is the kids that didn't get in, because P-TECH is a model. You can only have 125 kids per grade level per school. So the kids didn't get in. They said, what about us? And that's where we had to flip the script there. And so now if you're a freshman in Dallas and you're not on college bound, you either have to take principles of technology or principles of construction. And now the kids are learning there. Eddie Bernice Johnson, she was the chair of the STEM committee in Congress. They gave us flight simulators. So we're teaching our kids how to be pilots, how to do cybersecurity, how to do all these technology things that are in mechatronics. And so now our students are going to be able to have a living wage, and they're going to be able to prosper in the city of Dallas, which they don't now. Dallas is a tale of two cities. We have more Fortune 100 companies than anybody per capita, but yet you heard me describe our student population. And so I think technology, and you got to think differently. And we don't want to be the taxi cab of the industry. We want to be the Uber who helps catalyze some new ideas. And that's why these conferences are so exciting, where you got a few bold people that are trying to figure out how to do things differently instead of complaining about the situation that we're dealt with in this pandemic.
Jeff, as I'm hearing Dr. Hinojosa talking, all of his innovative concepts, they're all geared towards better student outcomes and better student performance. And at the end of the day, that is the core mission of the district. Can you share a little bit about, you were very early in adopting a healthy buildings philosophy in education. Where did that interest start, and how do you see facilities as a partner in that core mission of student performance?
I trained as an architect and am a registered architect. Chose that career because I believed passionately about creating better buildings for people. Never in 1,000 years thought I'd work for a school district, and was approached to run the capital program at Clark County School District. Initially said, no, I'm not interested. And my wife, who's much smarter than I am, told me I was a moron, and that I loved education, I loved architecture, and this was the perfect opportunity for me to put my money where my mouth was, to do something and to have that impact. So when I joined Clark County School District, I had an acute awareness of my role. My role was not solely to get buildings done on time and hire contractors and hire architects. It was to contribute to the core mission of the student. That's why we were there. We all understood that we were there for the student. It made me very popular with my peers in education, because they finally felt that somebody in facilities cared about what they were doing. That led to me eventually becoming the chief of facilities just prior to the pandemic. And it made me very successful to position myself and my staff as not just a service provider, but a partner in the core mission. That led to a lot of freedom and a lot of trust. So when I brought forward crazy ideas about, hey, let's look at indoor air quality, let's replace carpet in 250 schools, it was well received, because they understood it wasn't just, hey, the facilities guy wants more money. The facilities guy wants our kids to have a better environment.
Mm-hmm. Can you share some examples of some of the data and studies that have come out on the impact of facilities on education, whether that's CO2 or...
Yeah, I think that there is voluminous information out there about the impact of space on people and their well-being, whether it be the cognitive abilities of CO2, right? If the CO2 builds up, that has a negative impact on cognitive abilities. There's research out there about daylighting in schools and views. There's research out there. Walmart did research about putting a product that didn't sell under natural daylight. As soon as they put that product under natural daylight, it responded. So we are biophilic creatures, and there's voluminous amounts of research. The problem is that research exists for researchers. Right? Architects are talking about it, engineers are talking about it, and I like to say, if there's any silver lining from a facility standpoint to the pandemic, is there is a heightened general awareness about the impact of buildings on their occupants. So people that I would never have a conversation with about indoor air quality are now approaching me and asking about the indoor air quality in their space. There's a lot of really smart people doing work out there. The Harvard School of Public Health has lots of great places to start. I oftentimes advise school districts and companies not to reinvent the wheel, but rather access the information that's already available.
Mm-hmm. Great. Dr. Hinojosa, what efforts did you guys take over in Dallas to try to help build a safe space for kids to come back and be in the classroom? What needs to happen to make sure that schools stay open?
Yeah, we jumped on it early on, and we learned from the pandemic that we didn't even know really what caused this to spread. At first, we were so diligent on wiping everything down and, all those kinds of things. Later, we learned about the airborne nature of the virus. But it taught us a lot of other lessons. A lot of people now, we started wiping down things, but that was very labor intensive, and it was inefficient, and quite honestly, after a while, we didn't quit doing it for a while, because even though we learned that it was a different thing, it was the airborne situation that was causing the problem, you were afraid not to do it, and then we made such a big deal. We got in a fight with the Attorney General and the governor because we made people wear masks, because we knew that the environment had a big impact on the students. And then, you just wonder about what the students have been through, and their emotional state is already very fragile. And so they come back and they're scared, and people are on them all the time, and it's just, we know that, and the students that were immune compromised, they're really nervous about this. And coming into the feds started coming out with this HVAC stuff to help us modernize our heat, ventilation, air conditioning systems. And I'll be honest with you, I was a student in Dallas, and the facilities were awful. And I was a teacher in Dallas, they were worse, because we couldn't pass a bond election. And it just, and then we have these old buildings that are 100 years old, and they have all this stuff coming in that you can't control. And then when I was superintendent the first time in Dallas, we still were way behind. And now we're finally catching up, but as we catch up, we got to be smart on what do we do to make the learning environment appropriate for the students. And so we're learning along the way, and there's a lot of new technology that's going to help us make better decisions.
Jeff, how does that compare to the journey that Clark County went on in the wake of COVID? Can you share some of that development?
Yeah, I think that regardless of the size of the district, the location of the district, by and large, districts have been chronically underfunded. So you mentioned we have a $7.7 billion capital program in Clark County School District. The need over that same time period was $14 billion. So it was like going to lunch and the bill showing up being $20 and you have $10 in your pocket. You're constantly making difficult decisions. So our journey was much the same. We reacted like many school districts did. We had electrostatic discharge sprayers on hand, and we had those in place for norovirus for a number of years. So we increased the use of that. We experienced many of the same problems that other districts did. Obviously, people were very afraid. There were a lot of unknowns. I had a lot of custodians who didn't want to come to work. They felt that they were at the front line and they weren't being protected. Actually, I got an email from a custodian one day that said, "You should hire professional cleaners." And that really spoke to the fear that they had in doing their job. Obviously, they were already short-staffed and under-resourced before the pandemic. So when we added a significant amount of additional responsibility to their plate, that just wore them out. And we lost good people because we essentially worked them to the bone. But we didn't have other options, right? We were in a situation that if we were going to bring people back to buildings, there were certain guidelines released by the CDC, by ASHRAE, that we had to conform with. And regardless of that confirmation, regardless of following all of those things, it still wasn't enough. But it did allow us to start having conversations about the future of spaces. And it did start to allow us to have a conversation about the importance of investment in this tool, right? I view the building as a tool. It's not just to be taken for granted that it keeps you dry and it has four walls. It either has a positive or negative contribution to your health and well-being. Many of our school buildings, as Dr. Hinojosa described, were in poor disrepair. I don't think that Dallas ISD was much different than Clark County ISD in that regard. We had older buildings that had been neglected. We had buildings that we essentially knew we were going to eventually tear down, so we just continued to put Band-Aids on them until the funding would come through. We had difficulty passing bond initiatives as well. The last two times in Clark County that a bond initiative got passed, it was actually extended by the legislature. It did not go back out to vote to the voters because we feared that we would never get them passed. So the legislature had to take some extraordinary measures to extend that bonding capacity. So I think every school district has those struggles in their facilities.
Given the limited budget and the need is always greater than the resources you have, how do you prioritize what the most fundamental activities are? What do you see is you can start exploring X, Y, and Z innovation once you do this?
Yeah. So it's always a balancing act of priorities. And I advise anybody who will listen to me, you have to do the fundamentals first. If you have not created a filter program and changing your air filters on a regular basis, you should not be talking about these major upgrades to your mechanical systems. You need to make sure you have the fundamentals covered first. And then you have to look at it through an equity lens, right? We both had very, very large districts. I was building new schools at the perimeter of my valley at a very rapid pace. We convinced our board probably about 3 years ago, while I was still at CCSD, that we need to shift our mentality away from capacity to renovation. We needed to start looking at these older buildings, renovating them at the appropriate time, getting the most value out of that structure over its lifetime. That was a huge mentality shift. It was the first time in Clark County School District that capital funds primary focus went from being new construction to renovation. Subsequently, last year we secured an additional $3.5 billion worth of funding through the legislature, completely on that idea that all of that money would be used for the renovation of existing facilities and or replacement of aging facilities. It would not be used primarily to increase capacity in newer areas. So it was a paradigm shift for the decision makers. But we put out an argument. They agreed with the argument that every student was worth investing in, and it was really our responsibility to invest in every student and provide them all a great building to have their education in.
Eli, I want part of that question too. I think from a psychological perspective, the parents will forgive us if we commit educational malpractice because at least their kids are alive. But if we let anything happen to them safety-wise that we can control, then they'll never forgive us for that. Whether it's violence, whether it's being in a very unsafe area where the air quality is not good and they're sick at school because we're making them sick or because of things that we could do something about, safety comes first. That's part of the fundamentals that Jeff was talking about. And once you get that down, then you can move on and provide whatever your community needs.
Yeah.
So I've heard you speak before, Dr. Hinojosa, and you have some interesting philosophies. So given the basic needs of safety are met, can you share some of your philosophies on innovation and incrementalism? And because of the pace and the bureaucracy and the limited resourcing of these districts, it's important to take leapfrogging steps forward.
Yeah, I read more management books than I read education books, and I got hooked on this concept of incrementalism is innovation's worst enemy. And because people say, well, if we just tinker around the edges, we can make it a little bit better. Well, continuous improvement is not good enough. When you're in an urban setting, quantum improvement is required, and you can't have quantum improvement if you just tinker around the edges. So when I start my consulting firm, it's going to be called TNT, blowing things up. No, it's going to be the Together Network for Transformation. And you can only transform if you think big and you're bold and you try things that people tell you can't do. And that's why these kinds of conferences are so exciting, because you got people who are entrepreneurs who fail. They fell forward, but then a little glimmer of what they did, either they pick back up or someone picks up. And then you make it better for everybody else. And so, I thoroughly believe in that. And you know, I don't believe in strategic plans. Strategic plan, how many of us know what's going to happen 5 years from now? 5 years ago, we had a tornado in Dallas that wiped out 4 schools. We had pandemic 1.0, then we had pandemic 2.0, and then we had a snowmageddon, and then we thought we were good, and then we had pandemic 3.0, and none of those were on my calendar. So none of them were in my strategic plan. So it's a bunch of hogwash to say we know. But I do believe in strategic thinking. There's a significant difference. And I learned this at the University of Georgia Business School. And it wasn't even until I was already a 20-year superintendent that all of us know where we're going to be 18 months from now, personally and professionally. And then right now we're at spring break. We'll know kind of what we're going to be doing next Halloween. And then when we get to the summer, we kind of know which vacation we're going to take and who we need to hire and who we need to replace and what we need to do. And then every quarter you pierce the next quarter. And we've been accused of being innovative. A lot of this stuff wasn't even on our radar. These career institutes we weren't even thinking about 4 years ago. And now we're going to have 4,000 kids getting stackable credentials in these refereed external credentials in IT, mechatronics, and all these areas. Is because when you start thinking in a future tense like that, and then you just let it go, and you know, I scare my staff to death because I'm a ready, fire, aim guy, and I'd rather go fix something that I messed up. At least I'm doing something, you know. And I think that perfect is the enemy of great, and we're waiting for a perfect solution when we just go make decisions. And then we'll figure out how to fix them as we go. And I think that's why I'm an old school guy, 65 years old, and I love this technology stuff. Man, it's just exciting to see the art of the possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I would second that school districts tend to be risk-adverse bureaucratic systems. And if you're not willing to be a bull in a china shop, you will get sucked into that vortex. So many of the initiatives that I started at CCSD, I was told, you're crazy, it will never happen. And luckily I had a superintendent with vision that supported me and let me be a little innovative, and then a little bit more innovative, and then a little bit more innovative, until we got to a place where it's like, okay, now we can think really large about things that we've systematically ignored. So if you're in education and you're not willing to ruffle some feathers, you're not willing to upset a board member or two, you're not willing to upset the public just a little bit, you probably shouldn't be in education.
You got to stay employed, but you can be on the periphery of it.
Yeah. In full disclosure, I'm no longer with CCSD, but that was my choice. Our board fired our superintendent and then rehired him 3 weeks later. And I chose to move back into the private sector and doing some work with R0 Consulting, and I was okay with that. I was okay that if I lost my job doing what I felt was the right thing, that I could sleep at night.
But how did you even get yourself in a position to have that influence? A lot of folks working in facilities don't always get a voice at that table. How did you make yourself relevant?
I think ambition and ignorance. And what I mean by that is I knew that I had the skill set, that I could be successful at this, and I was ignorant in how it actually worked, so I just invited myself to the conversation. And I continued to invite myself to the conversation until somebody would listen to me. I didn't conform to the norms, right? I didn't look at the career trajectory and say, well, I've gotten to be in this position for 5 years, then I can apply for this position, then I can apply for this position. I just said, hey, I think I have a good idea, and please give me an audience. And if you're not the right person to give me an audience, I moved on to the next person. And if you're putting innovative and good ideas out there and you align yourself with the core mission of the organization, people will listen. But then they will also hold you accountable. You better produce. So when I put an idea out there, I understood I had an obligation to deliver. And especially in the early days, it was very, very important to deliver. Otherwise, I didn't get that opportunity again. So I think just put yourself out there. What's the worst you're going to get told? No?
Dr. Hinojosa, as you practiced your TNT and blew up the district and made these radical changes, what was your inspiration? Who were your inputs? Where did those ideas come from?
Well, I get my energy off of other superintendents and other people. We're in the people business. And so I've always been able to build high-performing teams. I've got the best team I've ever had. We spend a lot of time together. And you know, I'm not a traditional, I don't work with just traditional things. I like to try things that are new, and I get inspiration off of people who, you know, when I close my speeches, I always say, be proud of who you are, look to your past with pride. I'm proud to be an immigrant. I'm proud to have grown in the tough part of Oak Cliff of Dallas. But then the second part of that, I say, nothing great happens in the absence of enthusiasm. If you're not enthusiastic about it, why in the world would anybody follow you? And then also, you don't need to be a whiner, and people want a problem solver. And so when they see that you're willing to take on challenges and you're willing, just like we had this one issue, I looked at the data, and because of this pandemic and because of Operation Connectivity, I asked the question, we have 11% of our students are African American males. 51% of our suspensions are African American males. And I just asked a rhetorical question. This is an example how our innovation came out. I asked a rhetorical question. Why would I ever suspend a student again? Now we've got devices, we've got connectivity, we've got curriculum. Why would I put a kid out on the street? And I was expecting my staff to bring me back, well, we'll just, instead of going to the in-school suspension room, we'll have a different room. But what they came back to me was with this concept called reset centers. So instead of hiring, you know, in Texas, there's two sports, football and spring football, and we won a state championship. We're very proud of it. But why would they have the offensive coordinator running a disciplined boot camp inside the school and just making sure the students behave instead of changing their behavior so they don't come back there? So we spent $4 million of ESSER dollars to create these reset centers. And we hired behavior specialists from the community at all secondary campuses. And we jumped into it this year. In Dallas, we believe in IRS sometimes, the good IRS. Incubate, replicate, and scale. But this one, we just went to scale. Over the summer, we hired these behavior. We changed the environment of the room. We got this, and now we haven't, by the way, we discovered that 80% of our suspensions were discretionary. They were not mandatory because the student had done something very bad. Mm-hmm. And that's just one example of when you hire great people and you give them the chance to innovate, they come back to you with great ideas, and then I got to be their protector. And we had a couple little glitches. Everything I've seen about reset centers has been phenomenal. What I hear is not. So you got to be objective, even on your own ideas, and go back and evaluate. And effort is good, but results are better. And our results have been phenomenal. And now we're not throwing kids out to the street. In fact, the number of kids that are repeat offenders is like 5 to 10% of our kids ever go back to a reset center. In fact, they go back to give a high five to the behavior specialist. Thank you for not getting me kicked out. So that's just an example. And the last part of that is, I close my speeches about the future. I talk about the future. The only way to control the future is to create it. And I also talk about the future that some people are down about the future because they got reason to be. We've had the pandemic, we've had the cultural wars. Now we're going to have maybe a world war, although I think everybody else is using their intellect. Every McDonald's in Russia just got shut down. Everybody's trying whatever they can to stop this nonsense. But I look to the future with hope and aspiration because of, you got to have that kind of disposition if you're going to make a difference. And you can't just wallow in the fact that something can't get done.
Yeah, I like that it seems like a lot of your concepts, inspiration, and philosophies are borrowed from existing business management philosophies. And it's not necessarily from studying the precedent of education. It's about what else exists in the world that I can adopt and translate into this environment to make it better. Jeff, I'm curious, I always hear you say you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There is a lot to learn from as we think about healthy buildings. Can you share a little bit more about your thinking there, especially as there's been an oversaturation of information in the last 2 years?
Yeah, so I think there's obviously great value in original thinking. But there's not great value in original thinking in a vacuum. There's a lot of really great things happening in the world, and one should educate themselves about what's going on to give them the best advantage to do original thinking. So a lot of my successes have been taking things from other industries and applying them to my work that I was doing at the school district. I didn't need to reinvent the concept of healthy buildings. I went out and did the research. Who's doing this? Who's doing it well? I filtered it through my staff and my process and said, okay, these are the things that work well for us, and we're going to build upon them. These are the areas that I haven't found anything to identify, and we're going to go out and we're going to pioneer that information. So I think it can be an overwhelming task, especially for public sector employees that are already overwhelmed. When you say something like, okay, I want you to create a healthy building initiative. Well, I can barely keep my buildings open. I have staff shortages. I'm not funded properly. And now you want me to do a what? And what I advocate is it's not that difficult. People have laid that groundwork. They can help you, and they want to help you. Most people that are passionate about healthy buildings want to spread that awareness, and they want to help other people down that path. So I don't want it to be mistaken as, hey, everything out there already exists. It certainly doesn't. And there's great value in being an original thinker and great value in advancing that. But you can stand on the shoulder of these giants that have come before you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I promised I'd leave ample time for Q&A, but I want to end with one last question for both of you. As we think about, as Dr. Hinojosa says, creating the future for ourselves, what do we need our districts, our administration, our communities, our policy to rally around? What are some of the important messages you'd like this group to leave with that we can drive towards better student outcomes over the coming generation?
You want to take that first, or like me to?
I'll take it because it's part of my DNA. I don't let people steal my joy. First of all, I don't read blogs and social media. My wife does, and she tells me what they're saying bad about me. My chief of staff does. I need to know what's being said, but I need to stay in this creative way. In fact, I tease my staff because I'll say something, we're going to do something, and they go, well, I don't know if we can do that, Doc. Well, here we go. There's Debbie Downer, Negative Nelly, the wet blanket. Why are you telling us we can't do this? So, I mean, if you function like that, then I promise you will accelerate on whatever you're trying to solve for whoever your customer is. And you can only provide two things, a product or a service. And if your product and the service can solve things for your customers, our customers are students, your customers are your customers. And that's where you got to think about how you serve others for what's going to make things better for them. And I just don't allow negativity to get into my brain.
Yeah. I would say there's really three things. Eternal optimism, right? And I think being trained as an architect, we're constantly eternal optimists. We're thinking about something that doesn't exist and how to bring that to fruition. I think we need patience, and I think we need gratitude. There are so many people doing extraordinary work in public education, and sometimes they just need to be told thank you. Thank you for the sacrifices that you're making for our children. And I think that goes so much further than everything else. Obviously, we need resources and funding and politics and all of those things, but I think it really just boils down to the people who are working day in and day out for the benefit of our children simply just need to be thanked.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you both for the work you've done for our communities and for indulging my questions. And I believe now we have some questions from the group here. The first of which I think, Jeff, likely goes to you. What does the future classroom look like? What changes will we see?
So I think really our classroom, the structure of our classroom hasn't changed in a meaningful way probably in 100 years. And schools were really set up to create the next workers for the Industrial Revolution. We're going to see classrooms that have much more flexibility built into them. We're going to see classrooms that respond to their specific environments. Simple things such as daylighting will become standard, and unfortunately they're not. I don't know if the last time you were in a classroom, but many classrooms don't have exterior windows. Obviously there's going to be an infusion of technology, and not just in a passive way where we have a projector and things of that nature, but I think we'll see technology continue to improve those environments. I could speak for hours on what I think the future of the classroom looks like.
Hey, I want to bite of that, even though I'm
Yeah, no, please, no.
yeah,
Yeah.
see, I'm not an architect, but I stayed at a Holiday Inn last night, so I can dabble in this. We have a hybrid school that Apple helped us design, that the Mavericks have gamification in there. The furniture is completely radical. In fact, we don't have a cafeteria. We have spaces that are modular. We don't have typical PE. They have CrossFit as their PE. We have our autistic kids. And by the way, they go to school in person on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays they don't. They're at home in the virtual We have autistic kids that are now no longer bullied, and they are scoring 100% on their state assessment. It's a small school, 69 students. Every year we're going to add grades, so eventually it'll be 550 kids. But for those 550 kids, that's a perfect environment, and the school looks nothing like a traditional school, and that's why it's working.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So what advice would you give to smaller districts that say, well, you're Dallas, you have so many resources, this is feasible for you, but it wouldn't work in my district? How would you answer that kind of a question?
I answer that question all the time. It's the art of the possible. I mean, you take what you have and figure out what will work. Dallas hasn't, when I had to lay off 1,000 teachers in 2008, no money was missing, no money was stolen, we just overhired. And our building, so you have to create a narrative that now the state has given us a lot of money through House Bill 3 because of some of our innovations. Now, because we created the right narrative, our taxpayers in Dallas raised their taxes 13 cents. Our biggest taxpayer are our businesses. They voted for it, 13 cents. So, yeah. And the state, by the way, the state equalizes funding. So even if you're in a rural community, it's how do you spend your money? You got to have strategic abandonment. Educators are terrible about we add this and we add this and it doesn't add value and we keep adding stuff and we don't abandon things that don't work. In Dallas, for 3 years, nobody got a raise except our best teachers because we were going to funding our strategic initiatives that paid a big bet on some of these things. So, speak to the hand. I don't want to hear you don't have it. You just don't have the courage.
Yeah, I would second that all school district systems are resource constrained. It's about prioritizing the resources you have. It's also about reaching out to industry and developing those partnerships. Lean on them. They want an educated populace. That's a resource for them. So you'll find a lot of people just are trying to figure out how do I help? And once you give them that pathway, you can increase your resources.
Great. Our next question here, we can't go through school closures like we saw over the last 2 years. How should we be thinking about future-proofing our schools and preventing closures?
Well, you can't prevent it, but while the governor and I didn't agree on how we came back, I was glad that he forced us to come back. And let me tell you what happened, and I feel terrible for people in California who missed a whole year. He told us that if we didn't come back in October, we won't get any state funding. The pandemic hit in March. We figured a few things out. By September, he says, if you're not back by October, you're not getting any state funding. And we complained about it. We brought them back, and that was the right thing to do because for 95% of our students, that was the best learning environment for them. Now, we disagreed on we said they needed to wear masks, and then we ended up winning the court of public opinion on that. But I think we need to learn how to pivot quickly for most of our kids. I don't know that you can, that's a great question. I don't know that you can ever future-proof it. But how can you react? How can you pivot on a dime to get back depending on what you're facing?
Yeah, it's certainly about flexibility, right? Obviously, we want to take a proactive approach to providing the safest building possible, but there are going to be times, whether it's a pandemic, a natural disaster, things outside of our control, where those buildings may not be available. So we need to make sure that we have the flexibility to effectively continue education, whether it be via distance for short periods of time or it be in a hybrid situation that suits the students' needs.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, what are the principles of a healthy school building? And where would one start if this is a concept that's not been thought about before in a district?
So this is a shameless plug for Joseph Allen's book. He's written a book, Healthy Buildings. It outlines the 9 foundations of healthy buildings, and it's done so well that I think that's the first place to start. Once you've kind of got that, you've decided you're going to do this, you've got a little bit of information, reach out to your peers. Reach out to people who have implemented this at their school districts. Feel free to reach out to me. It's something I'm extraordinarily passionate about, and I want to see as many school districts implement these practices as well. And I would say it's not isolated or specific to school buildings. The principles of healthy buildings are universal across the space that we occupy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, it looks like that's the extent of our questions from the audience, but I just want to give one last opportunity. Anything else that you want to share? Dr. Hinojosa, what's keeping you up at night? What's getting you up in the morning? What are you spending your energy wrestling with now?
Well, nothing keeps me up at night. Actually, I sleep like a baby. I wake up every 4 hours crying. Then I hit the bottle, then I go back to sleep. But no, what does keep me up awake at night is the fact that we're the last industry to change. Everybody else has reinvented themselves. And we are because what keeps me awake at night is that everybody here is successful. And this version of school worked for us. I grew up with a lot of tough guys in Oak Cliff that were a lot smarter than me, but this version of school did not work for them. So I think, and we're so wed to seat time, we're so wedded to all these traditional things, the agrarian calendar, all these things that go back. I mean, why can't we use our facilities much differently for students to come when they have certain things? So that's what keeps me awake at night, is that we're still missing out on a lot of students that we're not connecting with because we're so traditional. And every time you try to blow it up, someone gets in your way.
I think to answer that question, I have a self-induced sense of urgency. We have a generational opportunity to change the way that we approach buildings, and I've spent my entire career thinking about buildings, not just school buildings, but all buildings. I don't want to let this crisis, unfortunate as it was, go to waste. We really do have an opportunity to change the way we think about buildings, how we occupy them, the responsibility that a building operator has, whether that be a school facilities manager or that be the hotel that we're in. There's a certain responsibility, moral and business responsibility that we have to the occupants of these spaces. And I want to spread that message as far and wide as quickly as possible and make it a conversation that happens in the bottom line. That it's not just, are we being profitable as an organization? Are we hitting our core mission? Are we taking care of the people, which is our number one cost, whether it's a school district. In Clark County, 87% of our $2.7 billion operating budget was people. Most businesses, the majority of their spend is people. So if we can take this opportunity to foster a greater awareness of the impact that our buildings have on our people and do positive things, that's what's keeping me up at night. There's just not enough hours in the day to get that message spread broadly enough while it's top of everybody's mind.
Yeah, and it really is a positive reinforcement cycle. If we can take measures to keep kids in the classroom, they perform better. And not only is that changing the education system, it's my understanding that every district in the country is funded based on attendance and performance. So the investment we make in the infrastructure to keep people in school and to keep them learning actually feeds money back into the school districts so that we can further this initiative.
Absolutely. Every district has slightly different funding models, but it boils down to kids in classrooms.
Great. Well, thank you both very much for sharing your time with us. I feel very blessed to be here on stage with you guys, and we're grateful for the impact you've made on a lot of lives. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.